I have my secretaries sitting on the left-hand side.
Hi, Josh.
Hi, Gabby.
They're dealing with the questions, which hopefully coming in.
So nice to hear your voice.
So now we are live on YouTube. Yeah. Silent. Very good. Starting. Here we go. So what time is it now? It's lunchtime for you?
11 a.m. Yeah.
11 a.m. Okay.
11 a.m. So.
Let me see. 7. Okay. It starts. Very good. Okay. Then good morning, Josh. Yeah. For us, it's 7 o'clock in the evening. Thank you very much for joining us at Wolfi's Talks. It's a real pleasure to have you. When I did some research about you, I thought about it that sometimes in life you meet people, and it's interesting when you start speaking to them that it's really a humbling experience when you find out how much they know, and then you find out how little you know about certain things. And it was always a pleasure when we met and you started to explain things to us. And I thought it was just amazing, because some people just look at a bicycle and they just see kind of a bicycle. And for you, I think you see, like most of us, see really one of the most beautiful inventions or invention in the science history. And then you know so much about it. So it's really amazing. And I'm really excited to speak to you. So thank you very much for joining us.
No, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Yes. You have been working with so many teams. You have been with Zipp for 15 years. You have been working with top athletes like Fabian Cancellara, Christine Armstrong, Carlos Sastre, and many, many other teams. Can you take us back to the times at Zipp when you started to work with them?
Oh, yeah. So a long time ago. So we, Zipp was started in the late 80s and really became a triathlon brand because it just wasn't accepted in road. The first 3-spoke wheel, the first deep section wheel, that crazy beam bike, the Zipp 2001. Yes. And the brand grew with triathletes, but never with roadies. And so the company actually went out of business, or almost out of business, in 98 and was bought by Andy Ording. And I met him in 99 to join. And my vision, I had, been to college for engineering, aerospace, automotive engineering, and really wanted to take the brand into road, and saw a lot of opportunities there. And so, I had raced in Europe for a couple of seasons in the mid 90s and had that background. And so I probably 2000, 2001 started taking products to Europe to try to get pro teams signed on, and just could not do it. I mean, nobody wanted the stuff. And finally, I think it was 2002, maybe end of 02, we met with Bjarne Riis, and he had SRMs with his guys. And it was one of those moments where we said, ooh, use the SRM, those wheels, these wheels, and we can show you the difference. And that was really the beginning of the carbon wheel in the pro peloton, and the beginning of us, in Europe at that level, at the pro tour level. So the next season we had CSC, and then really leveraged that into, team after. It's like every time riders would leave, they would get to a new team and they would want wheels. And so, when Tyler left CSC to Phonak, he said, well, we have to have Zipp wheels, and so it just grew. And I think by 2006, I think we were working with 6 teams, 7 teams, where I think 3 or 4 of them were purchasing the stuff. It was a great era. Not everybody made carbon wheels, and so we made the stuff for Campagnolo for a while. I think we made for like 25 or 30 brands there for a bit, and so then through those relationships, got to know all of their athletes and their teams. So it was a really exciting time.
So when you started with Zipp, was it that people were still obviously thinking about aluminium and they thought that carbon is too brittle? Because I think by that time there were carbon frames on the market. So what was the biggest resentment they had against the carbon wheels?
I think honestly, in Europe, the thing they had against them was that they were new and different and scary, right? I mean, it's a very traditional sport. And then I think for the rest of the world, they looked to Europe and said, well, the pros in Europe aren't using them, so they must not work. I mean, we see that today with a lot of technologies, that if the pros haven't adopted it, then the consumers don't see it as legitimate. And so we had to convince first the pros to use the stuff and then the trickle down. I mean, it took years. It really took years, but eventually it happened. And, you know, I think now people look at it, oh, of course we ride, you know, it's like it took 4 years to get, you know, Fabian and all those guys to ride the carbon wheels on the cobbles. And then the next year, the entire peloton was on carbon wheels, and that was the standard. You know, oh, of course we ride carbon on the cobbles. It's the fastest. They won. You know, I mean, there's a lot of psychological barriers that I think take even longer to break through than some of the technological barriers.
Is it that as well? Obviously, lightweight was always the thing to go for because aerodynamic is so difficult to measure for people when you're riding the bikes and wheels?
Yeah, for sure. You know, there's a cognitive bias. It's called the McNamara effect. And it's that we bias towards things that we can measure easily. And then we place the importance on that. And that's the problem with weight. You know, weight is the easiest thing to measure. And so we've had it the longest. And the second one is stiffness, right? Because you just need a weight and some sort of measuring device for deflection, and you can measure stiffness. And so our industry has placed real priority on those two elements of a bicycle for the longest time. But when you take the math and the physics and you break it down, those are probably the two least important elements of going fast. But of course, to turn people towards aerodynamics, I mean, it took us a dozen years, I think.
But you had a super cool team with CSC. Obviously, that was at the time that was one of the coolest teams. They had the Cervelo bikes, and then obviously the Zipp wheels, and you had Fabian Cancellara. And I remember there was a race in Tour de France where he won a stage, and he went just for the last kilometer. He just went for an attack with his 808s, and he was just driving away from everyone. Do you remember that day?
Oh yeah, I was there. That was a brilliant day. No, he is one of my all-time favorite quotes coming out of that. You know, he finished, and that night at dinner, he said 808 is the new 404. and he was telling the whole team that they needed to ride them all the time. I mean, you could really, you know, and that, you know, that was, I think it took probably 2 years of taking all those guys to the wind tunnel a couple times a year and showing them the differences, and telling them, I mean, we would tell him, you know, your Cervelo with these wheels is faster than the other team's time trial bike. And so, you know, when you're out there on an attack, you're on a time trial bike and they're on a normal bike. Like, it's a huge advantage. And I think once you could trigger that mentally for them, the advantage, then it suddenly had meaning. You know, I think up until then, so many of the riders looked at carbon wheels, especially, as a risk, right? What if they break? What if I hit something and crack them? What if it's windy and the handling is difficult, right? So I think the riders struggled mentally to be comfortable with the wheels. And, you know, that's the problem with sport, right? If you know, in car racing, if you do something to make the car faster, it's faster, unless it scares the driver. You know, in cycling though, if the rider's out there worrying about the handling or worrying about the wind in their mind, then they're not going full gas. Or it keeps them from going full gas, right? I mean, it's that doubt that can play in, and that's too big of a risk to take. So, yeah, I would say even to this day, the bulk of the work I do with teams and athletes is on the psychological side, even more so than the technical side.
Just to convince them that what you give them is really faster compared to what you were riding in the past.
Yeah, and to trust it, right? It's a real trust issue. And I think that's why I spend so much time in Europe with the teams, is kind of embedding with them and understanding their issues and their fears and their worries. Cycling is a big mental sport, right? It's about suffering and risk, and we can't do things to them that add suffering or add risk. Because it can take them off their game mentally. If a wheel is 1% faster, but it puts doubt in the mind of the rider, then it's not faster anymore.
Yes.
And so,
which project will you feel was the most challenging or the most rewarding when you had it with Zipp? Where the 303 for Roubaix, or what comes to mind?
Oh gosh, yeah, there's so many. The 303 for Roubaix was probably the hardest fought. Yeah, longest. I think that was 3 years in the making of, going over there. And at first we couldn't build wheels that worked. They broke every time. And so it was just failure after failure. I mean, it was really, that project was 3 years. It was probably 2.5 years of pure failure. And then like maybe 3 months of victory. I mean, we just got our heads kicked in over and over with that. And then once, we had to figure out the air pressure and the tires. We had to convince because if you remember the riders of that era, they were riding 21s in road racing and 24s at Roubaix. And all of the data was that these 27, 28 millimeter tires were faster, but nobody would ride them because they thought they were slow because they were too big. And so it was collecting the data, proving it to the riders, we had a day in the cobbles, one year with a number of riders, but Alberto Contador was there, and he would ride out and back, and the data was just clear as day. I mean, the wider tire was faster, and he would just say, "Nope, I know what I feel. It's not faster. I know what I feel." I'm like, "You're faster," and they just wouldn't believe it. And and then finally, one of my favorite elements of that story, we had Cervelo test team who were going to ride the wheels, and we had CSC or Saxo Bank, I guess by then. And that morning, Cancellara last minute got nervous, and he said, "No, I don't think I can ride them. It's too big of a risk." And as everybody was kind of getting ready and prepared in the pits, some Cervelo test team guys rode by, and Thor Hushovd was riding the 303s, and Fabian was like, "Well, he's riding them. Oh, okay, I need them. And I think it was that we had done enough preparation mentally with him that as to the advantage of the wheel, that all of a sudden it inverted the risk for him, right? It went from what if I break them to what if the other guy has the advantage and I don't? And that funnily enough was the thing that I think flipped it. And we've got data, and I think I've shown with you. I have a slide that I shared when I was there giving a talk, last year. But all of the things we did, the wheels, the tires, the tire pressure, all of the things that we put in place for him were worth something like 70 watts at 30 miles an hour over the setup that Tom Bonin was on.
This is crazy.
Yeah, it's just a huge number. That was probably our hardest fought, biggest victory. Because too, the things that we're doing, this marginal gains work, right? It's not guaranteeing victory. You still have to race the bike. And so, we're playing, it's a little bit like Moneyball. We're playing with the percentages around the edges. It's 2% here and 5% there and 4% there. And, we're just skewing the math in the favor of that rider. But they still have to do everything that they can do and do it right. And so it's not always in life that, the fastest guy wins or the guy on the fastest equipment wins. And so that one was just, I think, brilliant luck for us as well, that it all came together just perfectly.
Fantastic. And so for me, it's still tough, honestly, to get my head around. I know it, I've seen it, and I'm convinced now, but for me, it was really difficult to go to 25, 28 millimeter tires, because I was as well convinced that this is faster when you have it feels faster. Yeah. And then only when you see the data and you really analyze it a little bit more properly. When was the first time when you at Zipp came along and you said, okay, this is this is really faster when we go with a bigger tire. That's actually questions from Wes. So I encourage everyone who's listening and watching, they can ask us question on Zoom or on YouTube. So please.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, so it was probably around that 2008, 2009 as we were working on Roubaix, and we knew we needed the bigger tire to protect the wheel on the cobbles.
Mm-hmm.
And we would do testing on the cobbles, and we started to see in the data that not only was the bigger tire more protective, but it actually was faster. And then as we lowered the pressure and ran the testing over and over again, we just saw the riders go faster and faster. And so that was, for me, the beginning of this idea that, you know, there's something else in play, this what we now call the impedance effect, that, you know, you've got the first part of the rolling resistance curve, right, whereas pressure comes up, rolling resistance comes down. And then we started to see, and you can graph it in testing, that at some point, as the pressure goes higher and higher, the rolling resistance all of a sudden kicks up like this.
Mm-hmm.
And we call that the impedance effect. And that's, you know, this side of the curve is the casing losses in the tire. And this side of the curve is essentially the mechanical, like, bouncing and lifting and shaking of the rider. And I think that happens on all non-perfectly smooth surfaces, but the cobbles were so extreme that even with the equipment we had in '08, we could see it. And so, you know, over the years, once you knew to look for it, we started going for, you know, we needed better power meters, better measuring equipment. And it became easier and easier to see. And now that's widely accepted as true. But yeah, it was a crazy thought experiment of, well, if that exists on this super rough surface condition here, it should theoretically exist in all rough surfaces, just to some lesser degree. And so trying to put numbers to that, it's been hard. I mean, you know, we just published our tire pressure calculator, I think 3 or 4 months ago, with kind of all of this. It's 10 years of data. I think more than 4,000 unique optimizations and tests included in that data. But I mean, it's literally taken me more than 10 years to build the math behind that to make it actually predictive. That you can now put your data in and it'll say, oh, you know, with high certainty, this is your optimal, you know, within a couple PSI. That proved to be really hard.
In August 2013, there was quite a big change in your life. So you left Zipp after almost 15 years, and you bought one of the most traditional companies when it comes to cycling equipment. You bought SILCA, which was known as a pump company. And then you kind of revamped the whole company to an accessories company, and obviously as well a pump company, but as well with a super high level of standard when it comes to the pumps. And I think they are one of the most beautiful pumps in the market you can get. How was that when you started, when you went from Zipp to SILCA?
Oh, that was crazy. I mean, it was good. You know, I had done really the same thing for 15 years at Zipp. I mean, I loved it, but, you know, the wheels were great, but it eventually was kind of making the same thing over and over again. And, you know, each refinement was exciting, but it just kind of brought a little bit lesser reward. And I was looking for something new and different. And I really liked working with the teams and the riders and doing tunnel testing and optimization. And so I was looking to leave and do something else. I just wasn't sure what that was. And so Claudio Sacchi, who's the grandson of the founder of SILCA, third generation owner, he was calling around looking for advice because he had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and the company was bankrupt, and he wanted somebody to try to buy the name and save it, but he just wasn't having any luck. And so I think I was probably one of the last people, honestly, that he called. But he called me looking for advice, you know, saying, who do you know that I could try to sell the company to? Because I've been trying to sell it for 6 months and nobody's interested. And I thought, whoa, you're crazy. Who's going to buy a bankrupt pump company in Italy? Like, that's dumb. And Yeah, and then I think a couple weeks of thinking about it, thought, wow, there's just so much you could do. I was already building custom pumps for pro teams at Zipp. We had custom gauges we were building, custom pumps, because the pump gauges aren't accurate. Um, we'd struggled for years at Zipp with valve extenders. I think when I joined Zipp in '99, the two biggest customer service questions we had in '99 were, how do I get air in a disc wheel? Because the little valve adapter is terrible. And how do I stop my valve extenders from leaking? And when I left Zipp in 2013, our top two customer service questions were, how do I put air in this disc wheel? And how do I stop my valve extenders from leaking? And so, there was part of me that said, well, why don't we just make a valve extender that works? And why don't we just make a disc wheel adapter that works? Like, somebody just needs to put some engineering into that. But the wheel company's not going to do that. At Zipp, we would never prioritize that over the next better wheel or the next crank or the next handlebar. So yeah, it felt doable. It felt like something I could pick up and run with, and hopefully make something cool and unique and beautiful and quality. I think was, when you live in this pro world, you see the mechanics. You see it in your shop, right? The tools are not made like they used to be. And so, hex keys die in 6 months, and pumps, a pump in a bike shop lasts 3 months and it's gone. They snap in half, or the handles fall off. It's unbelievable, the level of quality that people were making things to. And I think, that there's so much price pressure. And so my vision was a company in this category that had no price pressures. We didn't need to, the design criteria for the pump wasn't going to be, $70 price point, right? The design criteria was going to be the best, and the price would fall where it may. And so we really took that kind of outlook with all the products that we do. And, stuff's expensive, but it works and people love it. And, there's certainly a customer for that. It's not for everybody, but, we're not a company for everybody. We're a company for really, really passionate, really enthusiastic, lovers of the sport. People who find joy working on the bike and tuning their setup and optimizing their air pressures. And, we're that company. And, if that's not your thing, then there's a million companies making pumps and tools and stuff for you to buy.
No,
the world does not need another company making cheap accessories.
Yes. No, the pumps are absolutely amazing. And I think you did some amazing projects with Dario Pegoretti before he unfortunately passed away. You did some routine racing and other projects. So how was it? How did you come to that connection with Dario Pegoretti?
So that story is funny. When we launched the Ultimate Pump, it was $450 and people went just crazy. We would get this brilliant hate mail. People would just sit and, hate mail us at their computer. You're terrible and you're ruining the sport. And we got this one particular email from a guy who, just said the meanest, it was just this awful string of curse words. And, but what really came out is he said, you become a fashion company for douchebags who ride, and he listed who ride Pegoretti frames and Campagnolo components and wear this brand of shoes and, wear Ossos. And he just had all of this hate. And I remember thinking, they want to beat us into making something cheap, and I want to flip that on its head and go back at them with something expensive. And so I knew that Richard Sachs was friends with Dario. And I called Richard and I said, hey, can I have Dario's, phone number? I'd like to ask him to paint some pumps so we could make even more expensive pumps. And so he gave it to me and I called him, and he just, I couldn't believe he answered his phone and he was just like, ciao, Josh, and he was game for whatever we wanted. And so we took that hate mail, the email, and we had Dario paint it on a pump. And we sold, that was the first Pegoretti we ever sold with that email hand lettered by Dario. And we put it on the internet for $2,500. and it sold in less than a minute.
Wow.
And so we emailed back to the guy who sent us the hate mail, and I said, hey, thank you for inspiring us to not just make a $450 pump, but to make a $2,500 pump with Mr. Pegoretti. You know, thank you, and you're welcome. And I'm still kind of sad that we never heard from him again. But no, it was honestly, I think, me wanting to poke that particular hater in the eye, and but it just struck a chord with people. I mean, they were beautiful and fascinating, and you know, I mean, you know, you could call Dario and talk to him, and then he would paint something for you. And so, yeah, we just got to every quarter he would do like 10 pumps for us, and we'd bring them in, and you know, you would open the market to them, and they would sell in minutes. As you know, because you are the only shop in the world who was buying them and inventorying them and selling them. It was an amazing time.
And we have a lot of customers, really, they treat it like an art piece. And it is obviously an art piece when you see it's hand painted, and it was really some absolutely stunning and unique pieces we got from him. Yeah. Besides the pumps, what's the product which is closest to your heart when it comes to SILCA products?
Ooh, that's a hard, you know, the T-ratchet and tie torque, that was a project that I just had in my brain. There's this problem in engineering where like you can picture it in your head, and then every time you sit down to like draw it or model it in 3 dimensions, you just can't make it work. It just doesn't make sense. And that was one that just kicked around in my brain for probably a year. And every time I sat down to do it, I hated it, and I just knew it wouldn't work. And then it kind of clicked. Yeah, it just clicked one day, and I sketched it out, and it was all of a sudden it was simple, and it was, you know, a quarter the size and, you know, a fifth the weight of what the original idea. I mean, it just, this, you know, kind of big piece of clay all of a sudden just went into this like really tight, elegant little idea. And that whole thing, after a year of ruminating on it, I think the whole idea probably was refined and done in 24 hours. I mean, it was just like that. And then to actually make it and have it work, and then it just, I mean, that product really just exploded on us. I think we put it on Kickstarter, and we actually had to cut our Kickstarter short because people were buying it faster than we could get materials to fulfill the Kickstarter. And so I think we did a 30-day Kickstarter, and we cut it off at 24 days because we were oversold by like 1,000 units or something. I mean, it was just a brilliant process, really, for me personally. You know, I think from the company's perspective, it was just a wild and chaotic time. You know, we had a moment where we all just sat and looked at each other at the end of the Kickstarter and went, holy hell, we've got to make all these. You know, I think we had to make 6,000 of them in like, you know, 2 months or something. And we were, at the time, the whole company was like 4 employees. And so, yeah, I think we worked 14, 15 hours a day for a month building them. And then I think we worked like 18 or 20 hours a day for a week to ship them, to hit the day we said we would ship them to the Kickstarter. It was just wild, but it was great times. I mean, looking back on it, it was one of my favorite periods of the company because it was just everybody was so committed. You know, there was nothing else in the world except making these things and shipping them. So yeah, that one I think will always occupy a special place. And now, honestly, it's gratifying to see, you know, I think there's 5 or 6 companies that have made almost identical copies of that product, which on the one hand is frustrating, but on the other hand, you can look back and you go, damn, we really had a good idea, you know, that you have so many people making, you know, have just straight up copied the thing. It hurts, but it also feels good.
When you have your moments, when you have the creativity, is it on a bicycle or is it in the mornings? When is your creative time when you come up with these ideas?
Ooh, that's a good question. It's pretty random. You know, I don't ride much. When I do ride, I need to ride more. As you know, it's, owning and running a business is like, you're never off. You're just always working. I think I could probably work 20 hours a day and still have emails to answer. But yeah, riding is a very creative time for me. I just don't do it enough. And other times I'd say it's, I don't like commuting. I don't like driving the car and commuting, but that's kind of becomes a nice time to just think, it's like I turn my phone off when I get in the car, and that ends up being 20 minutes each way that, I can just think, there's no external forces coming in. So, but yeah, I need to get on the bike more. Truly.
I have to tell you, when we sometimes show your products to customers and they get to touch them, they get to feel the pump, they get to feel the rosewood grip, and they feel the chuck and everything like this. I think this is something really special, and I'm not sure how many times. I'm sure you've been many times in the shop, but I'm sure as well for your staff working in the factory. It's an amazing moment, and I think it really shows the quality and the commitment. Every one of the, how many now? Over 20 staff you have now?
Yes. Yeah, well, we've grown nicely. It's great. We've got an awesome team. Awesome team.
What do you think your team would say about you, about the boss, Josh?
Ooh, I don't know. I'm pretty particular. Yeah, I don't know. I will say I think I drive them nuts at times with my. I live in my own head a lot, and I'm not the best communicator. And so I think I probably derail them from what they need to be doing too often with the latest thing that has come into my head, right? Right? Because that's I think probably my biggest weakness with my people is I'm a big believer that you surround yourself with people who are smarter than you and have more skills than you, and you empower them to go change the world. And I generally really try to leave them alone, but then I'm also prone to kind of like having an idea pop into my head and just picking the phone up and saying, hey, stop what you're doing, let's do this. And you get the groan of, oh, I'm in the middle of this other thing. Oh, sorry, but this is really cool. So yeah, it's that separation of the urgent and the important is not always easy.
What do you enjoy most of having your own company? Now you have worked for 15 years for Zipp, and now being your own boss. What's the biggest joy and what's the biggest challenge?
Oh gosh. I'd say the biggest challenge for me is I still, as an engineer and a very technical person, I probably live in my own head too much for a company owner. It's really hard. There's what we call like maker's time and manager's time, right? And a good manager is kind of going from thing to thing, maybe meeting to meeting, checking in with people. I mean, really, really working on the business and working on the people in the business. And that's really hard for me sometimes to get out of my head of, if I have a good idea, then I would be happy to lock myself in a room and work on it for a couple of days, if that's what it took. And you just can't do that. So I think, some of my biggest joys of running the company are, when you see the team pull together and, I know you've seen it in your organization when they just blow you away with what they've come up with. There's times that I have something in my brain that I think is going to be big and amazing, and I give it to them and they do their thing with it, and you come out the other end of the project and it's even bigger and more amazing than you thought it could be. And there's, it's like the proud parent, right? It's like, wow, we really knocked this, out of the park. This is amazing. And yeah, those are just super, super proud moments. And then on the difficult side, yeah, for me, I just have a lot of days where I'd love to just bury myself in a project and you just kind of can't do it. And so that part of it's a mixed bag, but I think that's, everybody's got their strengths and weaknesses, and you just try to you try to lessen the weaknesses and improve the strengths, right?
There's another fascination I think you have, and you're almost obsessed with this hour record. Yeah, I think that's one of the pure events in cycling where one man or one woman goes on a bicycle and rides as far as they can in 1 hour. I know you have been involved in Victor Campenaerts' success of beating the world hour record and beating Bradley Wiggins, and I think he rode 55.098 kilometers, and you were part of the team. So can you remember how this was with Victor?
No, so I actually wasn't part of that. Victor and I were working on a new record that he was hoping to break this year around the Olympics, and that's been the UCI has said no records. So no, I had worked hard to convince him. He's a big listener to the podcast, and so it was when they were all under quarantine in the UAE at the Tour UAE that I guess a bunch of them were listening to our podcast, and he contacted me and said, "Hey, I hear what you're saying, and I think I can go faster. You know, can we do this? I'm in. Let's go." And then the UCI said no contest. But no, so I've been involved in a bunch, almost all of the other modern hour records in some capacity or another, except for his.
Yes. We had Alex Dowsett on the show a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
It was very, very interesting. We spoke about his hour record. So how far do you think possibly, when everything works and they're on altitude, what's the number in your head and the dream number you have? 56?
56 is possible. Yeah, I don't, it's hard to say. You know, I think if we get the right, the challenge I think is going to become the acclimatization to the altitude, you know, or a change to the rules of the bike. You know, we're really getting close. I mean, I think Victor could put another, at Aguas Calientes, he could put another probably 500 meters on his record. With some of the stuff we did, there's an even higher track now, but the problem is you start to lose too much power. And so, you know, in my mind, there's going to be some, South American time trial specialist born that grew up at 8,000 feet or something, who is going to have the engine and this lifelong acclimatization that I think is going to make it possible. Because right now we're seeing that, you know, there's a track significantly higher even than Aguas Calientes, but it's not, it's too high for the aerobic records. You know, we're breaking all of the sprinting and, you know, the shorter events. Those records are all falling, but the longer stuff, it's just too taxing on the body. The riders, I don't think we're there yet to do it. So, but yeah, no, the hour is fascinating. I mean, it's the one thing in cycling where, you know, what I love and what I do is almost a one-to-one. You know, if I say we're going to do this and it's going to save this, it'll make you go this much farther, then that's totally true. If the rider can hold the power that we use in the model, we can model the record within, 15 meters or something. I mean, it's pretty unbelievable how good the math works out when you do the hour record.
When did you fall in love with mathematics and physics? You were kind of good in these things in school, or this came when you studied?
Oh, I loved math as a kid. Really, it was my 8th grade math teacher pulled me out of class one day or pulled me out of 7th grade and put me in 8th grade math and said, you have a huge potential and you're going to be good. And I didn't agree and I didn't like it. And I thought he was a big jerk but he was right. And I worked so hard for him and was a big math competition kid and all that. And I really just fell in love. He was the one that really taught me that there was beauty in the math. It wasn't just numbers on a paper and getting the answer right to get an A on your homework, but there was this beautiful thing if you could picture it in your brain. And from then on, I was just super into it. And yeah, I still to this day, I've forgotten, I think, most of what I've learned. So much of it, when you don't use it, you really do lose it. But I find real beauty in the mathematics, and yeah, seek it out where I can. And that's where I'm fortunate too, to be in a place where, you can always find people who know more than you and pull them in. So we've had great luck over the years with pulling in experts from aerodynamics or CFD or structural analysis. And I just love those, being able to sit with people who are real experts in certain types of mathematics. And, I know 2% of what they know, but you can just sit and be kind of immersed in the beautiful math. Yeah, I love it. Love it.
You get invited a lot as well to Tour de France and for big teams now. Have you been at a Tour 2019?
Ooh, was I there last year? I don't even remember. I'd have to look at my calendar. No, I think yeah, I was there last year with, so unfortunately, events like the Tour in particular is not fun to be at. It's just logistically too hard. And so, like if I go to the Tour, and I was there last year with EF and Bora and Ineos and a couple other teams, you go for the days ahead, the 3-4 days ahead. And that's where a lot of the work gets done. And then once the race starts, it's just too hard to be around it. The roadblocks, having the right pass, being able to take your car to the right place. It's not fun. And so I've learned that lesson. I was fortunate in the CSC in the Saxo Bank days to be fully embedded with the team for 2 different tours. And that's nice because, if you're on the bus with the riders, you go where they go. It's logistically much less complicated. But we're at a place now that nobody needs that. And my life is too busy to go spend 3 weeks with them. So yeah, I typically do the Flanders-Roubaix week every year and the week before the Tour with our teams. And if there's a big, the Olympics, something like that, we might go and do some modeling for certain teams or riders. I do a lot of looking at pavement and looking at wind conditions. And but anymore, a lot of this can be done in computer models as well. So I don't want to put myself out of a job and say that, you don't need to go there, but most of the time you don't really need to go there.
Who's the most fun guy and to work with from the riders, and who understands most what you're doing for them and with them?
Ooh, gosh, that's a good question. I would say currently, I really like working with Andreas Clear, who's director at EF. We worked together when he was a rider. If you've seen, I did a podcast interview with him, and it's on our YouTube channel and Marginal Gains. He was a non-believer, non-technical rider up until he got to test team, Cervelo test team, and it just clicked. And I think that makes him so powerful and so open-minded to work with as a rider, because he kind of sees both sides of the coin, right? He comes from, being a true non-believer to a true believer. And he can sit with his athletes and really kind of get into their heads over like their skepticism or their issues or their difficulties with what maybe the team is asking them to do or to ride, and then kind of reframe it in a way for them that really helps them understand it. And he, as a result too, he's someone that, I can call if we've got a problem or maybe like a psychological issue, the riders don't want to do something, can maybe help you understand that. One of my favorite stories with him, we constantly wanted them to be on deeper wheels because, the math on the deeper wheels is just so clear. I put you on a deeper wheel in a Tour de France stage, you go from a 303 to a 404, and that's 300 calories saved. It's a slightly higher top speed. It's going to help you close the gaps you know, when the attack goes, those sorts of things. And talking with him about, you know, trying to get him, it was Damon Reinhardt at Cannondale, now at Cannondale, was a test team then at Cervelo. But talking to him about, you know, riding 404s in the mountain stages and saying, well, you know, if you're doing all this work to get the guys to the base of the early climbs, and you're spending the rest of the day in the laughing group. And so you don't need these lightweight wheels to climb, but you do need them for all of the other things. And he was the one to really say, yeah, but what you don't understand about the laughing group is, you know, we climb at the pace of the slowest rider. So that doesn't matter. He said, but we descend like a bat from hell. Mm-hmm. And he said, and if there's one wind or one bobble, or you open a gap at, you know, 70 kilometers an hour, you will never close it. And so he said, so my fear isn't that I need 2 watts here or 4 watts there or 200 calories saved, but that if I have too deep of a front wheel and I have to touch the brakes, or I get a nervous twitch on the descent and I open a gap, then I don't make the time cut. And so, you know, and he could just so eloquently kind of put it together like that. And you think, oh, that's the one thing the math doesn't show, right? Yes. You know, and I think I've had a million conversations like that with him. He's just got that great thought process. You know, Rolf Aldag, I know you had on Wolfi's talks. He's another one, right? That very technically minded like that. I'd say as far as riders go, other than that, Roger Hammond, people don't, you know, he's probably the greatest English speaker to ride the cobbles at Roubaix. And not most people don't realize he's actually a degreed engineer who worked as an engineer before he became a pro cyclist. And so he was really instrumental in helping us with that 303 development, but then also in helping us find ways to explain a lot of these things to the cyclists. And so he's probably somebody I think about and occasionally trade emails with, but I think about him probably weekly, you know, something he would have said or a way he would have said something that I use, you know, with our athletes today. So.
How's Peter Sagan?
He's a character. I mean, what I love about Peter is, you know, the Peter you see in the interviews and all of that kind of crazy out there guy. I mean, that's kind of what he's really like. You know, he's someone for me. He's not super technical. He really trusts in what you tell him and what the team says to do. He's a terribly nice guy. But, you know, I think when you're at that level, you know, there's a distance that the riders really, I think someone like him needs to maintain for their own sanity. And so, you know, I've worked with enough of these guys over the years to know that it's not my place to, you know, go be his friend or to get close to him. You know, we're there to do what they pay us for. So he's a lovely guy. I honestly worked with him for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, and I can't say that I know him all that terribly well because it's just not someone to get close to. You know, in some ways, you know, Lance Armstrong was the same way. I mean, you'd work with him. I worked with him for a number of years and wind tunnel testing and all this. But, you know, I think when you're at the very tip top, everybody wants a piece of you. And, you know, it's, I don't need to be one more person wanting a piece, right? So we do our work and we kind of step back. Yeah. And then, you know, I think one of the things that's great about this sport is that really, you know, there's just so many real passionate enthusiasts about the sport who are kind of shockingly normal. You know, it's, I really enjoy, you know, hanging with the teams and being embedded with them during the races and, you know, having dinners and things. And, you know, you sit around after the race and they talk about, you know, cars and movies and stuff like that. And everybody just seems so normal in those moments. Yeah, I really love that about this sport.
I think something great as well, what you started, I don't know, maybe 1.5 years ago, was the Marginal Gains podcast with your 2 friends, with Hottie and Fatty. Yeah. And I think that's an unbelievable unbelievable source of information. And I think a lot of, as you mentioned before, a lot of the riders, when they were in confinement during the UE tour, they started to listen to the podcast, and that really got it even more traction than it had before. But how did you come up with the idea, and how is this going?
Oh gosh, it's going great. I mean, I kind of can't believe the response and the feedback and the growth. I mean, I think for subscribers, we're like 15,000 subscribers or something now. I mean, which I just never imagined. Yeah, I think my favorite story about the podcast was last year. I was at Roubaix, and I think my flight out was on Monday. So quite often, you know, we go and, you know, I'm involved in all the prep, right? But I don't need to be there for the race. And I got a cheaper flight out on Monday. And so I was running wheels for EF. And so, you know, you're in a car following the race and kind of running the spare wheels. And we were the car that had the Carrefour de l'Arbre, you know, the last brutal cobble section kind of before the finale. And we park and we go running into the sector. And I'm standing there with wheels, and all of a sudden, from like, I don't know, 20 people down across the street, somebody starts going, "We love the podcast." And I'm like, what the hell just happened? Yeah, it's nuts that it's global. And but no, the idea, I'd had the idea in my mind as a blog, and I'd started sketching out these blog ideas, and I just never had the time to make the blog. You know, a good blog post, by the time you get pictures and graphics and stuff in it, I mean, a good blog post can take 10, 12 hours, right, of time to create. You just don't have that time in the day running a business. And it was Hadi actually emailed me and said, "Why no podcast?" And I thought, I don't know, what would we do with a podcast? And he started kicking ideas out, and I thought, well, that kind of sounds like, you know, could be the blog I was putting together. Can we do it without graphics and pictures? You know, can we do it just audio? So why not? Let's give it a try. And yeah, it took on a life of its own. It's been really an unbelievable thing, you know, for me, and I think for the company and the listeners. And, you know, I think we averaged a couple hundred questions an episode coming in. And so we started doing the Ask Josh Anything. And that's really snowballed. And yeah, and now we've got a YouTube channel. The SILCA YouTube is Marginal Gains TV. And we're trying to take some of the more complex questions that you really do need graphics or pictures to help answer. And we're taking those and doing them on the Marginal Gains TV. And that's also really starting to pick up and you know, gain some traction. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun, but I really owe the success of that I owe to Hadi and Fatty. I mean, those guys really, truly, like, they do all the work. So I think people don't think, I mean, as you know, there's so much preparation that goes into these things, and they, you know, they make all the questions, and they kind of do the intro and the outro and the layout. And I just get to show up and talk, which I'm good at.
Yeah, no, very good. And the information is really in depth, and I've never listened to anything like that. And I think you really get answers for all the questions, sometimes even obviously to questions you never thought about, but then you speak about it and it's really inspiring. And then you kind of see the world completely different. Obviously the whole thing with tire pressure, which really opened up my eyes to this whole scenario. And it really changed riding. And obviously it changed riding for a lot of our customers, because all our team now is absolutely behind that theory that this works so much better. Yeah. So thank you very much for that. I think great work.
No, thank you. Thanks for listening.
Yes. No,
spreading the word.
Yes. It's actually quite interesting when you then, obviously we know us for a few years, but when you hear somebody so often and for 1 or 2 hours a week, and you listen to someone's voice, and then you think, oh, that is really so familiar. And when you see them each other again, I think it's really interesting how nice it is to stay in touch over a podcast like this.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's great. It's funny. You know, we're not doing trade shows at the moment, but Eurobike last year, like 3 or 4 people stopped me in the hallways and said, "Wait a minute, I know your voice." Yeah. Like, they had no idea what I looked like, but they heard me talking, and it's funny, the response to that. So It's
So
great.
you became a famous person. So my next question would be, is there a famous person if you could change their life for one day and you could live their life for one day, is there someone you would like to be for a day?
Oh gosh. Man, that's a hard one. I'm sure there is. But I truly, Elon Musk, he's crazy.
Okay.
And I disagree with so much of what he does and says, but his career, plural, right? I mean, he's touching all these things that I've had lifelong fascination with, space, automotive, the stuff he's doing in solar power and energy. I mean, those are all things I've, had contact with in my career. I think, if you added, aircraft in there, it would be like complete, right? I to this day am obsessed with planes and space. I've been fortunate enough to actually do a tour at SpaceX, and have friends that work at Boeing and at NASA, and I just love that stuff. I love being immersed in it, and really being surrounded. We've said before, like surrounded by all those crazy smart people. It's those are places that are kind of magical because you can just ask unlimited questions and be surrounded by these people who have answers, right? Or working on them. I think we live in this social media world where everybody's on Facebook all the time with all the answers. Everybody's is a genius at everything, right? It's like all of our friends are like PhD epidemiologists at the moment, right? With coronavirus, and everybody seems to know everything, and it's like, well, shit, that's not the world I live in. I've got 10 million questions. Like I want to go ask them of people who really know. Yeah. And so, I think being, him in that environment and just being able to walk around and absorb, that would be amazing. That would be amazing.
When you speak about social media, who do you follow on Instagram? Is anyone who sticks out and you would say, this is my first to go to and I want to see what he's up to?
Oh, no, I got to be honest. We have somebody that does that. Michelle in marketing does Instagram for us. And I really try to avoid social media because it's just, there's so much negativity out there, right? And Instagram is probably the one platform worth being on. Yeah. But from a time perspective, it's finding, I don't have the time or I might scroll through it to see how our stuff looks. But no, the others, the Twitter and the Facebook, it's a rabbit hole that I don't want to fall into. It's like, I don't, like, we don't have TV in my house, right? Because it's a big time suck. It's just too easy to fall down that rabbit hole. And, 2 hours later, you've learned nothing and you've missed out on 2 hours of something you could have been doing. So no, I really think that I was lucky early in my career, as Andy Wording said, there's, there's two challenges of business, right? And it's time and money. And in the beginning, it's, you have no money. And then as you grow, you realize that, and you become successful, you realize you have no time. And so it's kind of that challenge of thinking about valuing your time in the same way that you value your money. And when you think of it with those glasses on, it really, there's just a lot of stuff. I joke with my people all the time. You say you need a to-do list, but you also need a not to-do list. Mm-hmm. And, falling down, Facebook, listening to your friends argue on social media and watching television and a bunch of other things. Those are on my not to-do list.
Almost one of the questions I had on my list is there any important and non-negotiable rule in your life you have and you live by? But you almost answered this, that you want to have time for yourself, for the family. Is there anything else you would say defines you as a person?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'd say for the family, I'm pretty strict with my, I'm all about like trying to be present. People say that, but like I turn my phone off at night. Most every night. I always try to have like a day of the weekend where I'm completely disconnected digitally and just try to like be in the moment with the family. And just enjoy the kids and the things that we're doing. I think that's important, to not, because like we said, I could be doing email 20 hours a day and still have more, because email just begets more email. Right? But the other one is, I think, just, for me, it's all about curiosity. I just look at the world as like, it's this infinite amount of stuff that I don't know. And, God, I'd love to learn all this stuff. It's how do we, who can I ask this question of, or what book can I find, or what resources out there? And I think for me, it's trying to just always have that, that curiosity, because that's where, I think if I look at my career and think of where I've been successful at Zipp or at SILCA with product, it's, I'm not any smarter than anybody else, but I think I've been good at trying to absorb as from all these different places. And then, those true moments of creativity a lot of the time are just taking 3 or 4 ideas from other industries or other places and seeing a way to fit the puzzle pieces together. And I think it's just, if you're always curious and you're always absorbing, it feels like it's just that many more opportunities for those collisions to happen. I think of Steve Jobs. He used to tell a story about, the rock polisher. He said when he was a kid, his neighbor had this rock polishing machine, and you've seen, it's like a little barrel and you put the rocks in it and then it sits there and spins and the rocks get all polished and smooth. He said, it's the idea that you could put all these crappy rocks in this thing and it would sit there and they would all just bang against each other. And a week later, they're all these polished, beautiful things. And I think at some level, that's kind of like life. If I can learn, from everybody around me and surround myself with all these ideas and smart people and technology, it's just that many more collisions, right, to keep polishing and building the ideas that we've got. So stay curious. That's probably my motto.
I like that a lot. Yeah, very good. Thank you. I have a few short questions as well for you. Obviously, I want to see anything on your bucket list you haven't achieved and you want to achieve.
That's a good question. I'd have to think about that one. No, not that I can think of. My bucket list is all. I'm pretty bummed. One of them is we were supposed to go to Africa with our kids this summer, and that's now all canceled. But my wife has a medical project in Kenya that she works with, and we were all going to just go spend a month kind of bouncing around Africa and seeing the animals and safaring and all that stuff. But no, career bucket list. I feel really fortunate. I've been really, really fortunate in my career to, I think I joke with some of the guys at Zipp, we've had a couple of what you call like once in a career successes. And I feel like I've been successful to have probably half a dozen once in a career types of success. But if you're doing it right, every maybe 4 or 5 years, you could land on another one. And so that's, I don't know what that is, but it when you see it.
Do you have a party trick, like something you impress people when you sit around the table and you show off a certain skill?
Ooh. No. I would like to, though. Yeah, no, not really. There's like when I do talks or technology talks, there's a handful of sort of like parlor trick things that you can go to that always work. I think last time I was with you, we talked about blowing everybody's minds with the wheel. Remember that? Yes. What speed is the bottom of the wheel going?
Yes.
Remember? And so for our listeners, the bottom of the wheel is touching the road. It's at 0. and the hub is going at the speed of the rider, which means the top of the wheel is going at 2 times the rider's speed.
Yes.
Twice as fast. And that one always seems to blow people's minds. But
actually, funny enough, you say that Wes was speaking about the talk today, and then I was speaking to Wes, and he said, "Oh, remember that with the wheel?" And I didn't get it.
The wheel.
He was fascinated about this. Very good. If you once write your memoirs and the book about your life, what's the title?
Wow, man, you're like deep. These are deep questions.
Ask Josh.
Killing me, Wolfi. Yeah, it is Ask Josh Anything. Ask me all the stuff I don't know. Yeah, gosh, I don't.
Not yet.
I
Okay,
don't know
we'll give you another chance.
Yeah, no.
Very good. I researched something, the CDA of a penguin, yeah, because I was listening to that talk, and I thought he's actually give it a guess, you know, but I think a good guess on somebody on a CDA level is 0.0.18, 188, 1. What do you think is the penguin?
We're talking a penguin like
yes.
swimming, like swimming. Hydrodynamic CDA. Yes. They're not standing there with like this.
Oh, hydrodynamic.
Oh gosh, and it's CDA, not CD. I mean, the CD, the drag coefficient, I would probably put somewhere in the like, I don't know, 0.03, 04, and then what's the area of a penguin? It's probably like 1/10 of a meter. So
yeah, very good. You were very good. It's 0.033.
0.033. Okay, yeah, times point. So yeah, it'd be.
Very good.
Yeah, I mean, they're amazing. You look at birds and stuff. I mean, some of our best shapes. You look at, you know, a good airfoil will be in have a CD of the 0.0, you know, 02 to 04. So 0.033, that's awesome.
Yes. One last question. If there would be option to spend one day with a person, dead or alive, who would that be?
Ooh, dead or alive? It's a hard, probably Einstein.
Okay.
I mean, he's like that. That's one I have a real, with math, a real physics obsession. And you know, I think of Einstein and, you know, Richard Feynman. I mean, he's the other one that, you know, they conceptualize stuff that I feel like I've read about and thought about for 20 years. And every time, you know, I think Feynman had the quote that, you know, everyone who says if you say you understand quantum physics, it means you don't understand it. Okay. And I think, you know, that you take the groundwork that like an Einstein or a Feynman laid, and you come in and you try to understand it, and it's still impossible to really wrap your brain around in a way that that you can conceptualize. I'd love to peel that back further and see, you know, how did they get there in the first place, right? I can't wrap my head around it properly, knowing it exists. How the hell did you guys get there from zero, right?
That's interesting. It's interesting, isn't it? When your brain just stops somewhere and you can't take it any further because you just don't get it anymore. Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Took enough of your time, Josh, and it was a great pleasure. Just as I expected it would turn out. And I think really what you do with SILCA is amazing. I think you make really many cyclists happy about the quality of your products. I think that the podcast is amazing. I think you're educating and making cycling life so much better and easier for a lot of people out there. So keep this up in both ways. And I'm really looking forward to see you soon when we can travel again. We'll hope to welcome you back.
Yes, me too.
For another talk.
Thank you.
Live. And again, thank you so much for the time.
Well, thank you. It's always a pleasure, Wolfi. Thanks so much.
You. Are you into downhill riding?
Downhill riding?
Downhill?
Like on a mountain bike?
Yes, downhill. We have our next guest is an absolute superstar, a mountain bike superstar. It's something new to our talks. We have Greg Minnaar, obviously multiple gold medalist,
Wow.
world champion,
Yeah.
and he's going to be on Friday. So that's going to be a super exciting talk for us.
Oh, that's awesome.
About his amazing and long career.
Now that's like quantum physics. I watch those guys and I have no idea.
Yes, they define physics. They change something.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I having been to some of those events, I mean, you stand there and you look down and my brain just cannot see the possible line. I mean, it looks like falling off the edge of a cliff. And no, I do not downhill.
Very good.
But that's
Josh,
awesome.
thank you so much. Best regards.
Thank you, Wolfi.
Your wife, and I hope to see you soon. Stay safe.
Thank you, you too. Love to Gabi.
Yeah, I will. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.